The surgical forceps froze in Dr. Rachel Thompson's trembling hand, her eyes locked on the writhing black mass emerging from 10-year-old Ethan Miller's swollen neck. What should have been a simple infected cyst extraction had become a nightmare. Something alive, segmented, and impossible was crawling out of the boy's flesh. "Oh my God!" the attending nurse gasped, stumbling backward as the creature dropped onto the sterile tray with a wet thud, its body still pulsing with life. Jennifer Miller's knees buckled against the hospital bed rail, her son's weak whimpers piercing through her shock. She'd ignored it for weeks, dismissed the growing bump as just another mosquito bite from their trailer park's mosquito-infested creek. The memory of Ethan's sleepy voice echoed, "Mom, it feels like something's moving in there." "Get me a specimen container, now!" Rachel barked, fighting her own revulsion. But as she stared at the alien parasite writhing under the harsh fluorescent lights, one terrifying question consumed her thoughts. How many other children in Pinewood were carrying these things? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 weeks earlier, Jennifer Miller had been scraping ice off her windshield in the pre-dawn darkness of another Michigan winter, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air as she prepared for another double shift that would barely keep the lights on. At 38, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to survive on 4 hours of sleep and sheer determination. The rusty Honda Civic wheezed to life on the 3rd try, and she whispered the same prayer she'd been saying for 2 years. "Just get me through today." The Pinewood trailer park had never been anyone's American dream, but it was home to families who understood that dignity didn't depend on your zip code. Jen had moved there after Michael's funeral, when the military death benefits ran out faster than grief, and staying in their old house became as impossible as pretending her world hadn't shattered. Now she worked morning shifts at Murphy's Gasco, where the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the coffee maker perpetually dripped brown water that barely qualified as caffeine, then rushed to her evening cleaning job at the downtown law offices, where she emptied trash cans for lawyers who earned more in an hour than she made in a month. Her son Ethan was everything good that remained of her marriage to Michael Miller, a brilliant boy with his father's curious mind and gentle soul. At 10, he possessed an unusual fascination with insects and nature, spending hours by Willow Creek behind their trailer, collecting specimens in mason jars and sketching detailed drawings in a composition notebook he'd filled twice over. He never complained about the hand-me-down clothes or the fact that dinner sometimes meant peanut butter sandwiches 3 nights running. Instead, he'd wrap his thin arms around her waist when she came home exhausted and tell her about the interesting beetle he'd found or the way sunlight looked different when it hit the creek water. Their next-door neighbor, Eleanor Hutchinson, had become their unlikely guardian angel. At 75, the retired elementary school teacher lived on a fixed income that barely covered her medications, but she never hesitated to share her homemade soup or to watch Ethan when Jen's shifts ran late. Eleanor had taught 3rd grade for 42 years before budget cuts forced her into retirement, and she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades shaping young minds and refusing to let bureaucrats diminish her impact. Her small trailer was filled with books, photographs of former students, and the kind of wisdom that only came from watching a neighborhood change over 4 decades. The Pinewood community had developed its own unspoken rules of survival. Share what you have, mind your own business unless someone needs help, and never let the outside world convince you that poverty meant you deserved less respect. They were janitors and factory workers, single mothers and disabled veterans, people who understood that sometimes the most important wealth was the neighbor who checked on your kids or the friend who helped you stretch $1 until payday. But lately, something had been changing in their small corner of the world, though none of them could have predicted how drastically their lives were about to transform. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when Ethan bounded into the kitchen, scratching absently at his neck. "Mom, I think a mosquito got me good yesterday," he said, tilting his head to show her a small red bump just below his left ear. Jennifer glanced at it while pouring lukewarm coffee into her thermos, noting it looked like any other insect bite he'd collected during his adventures by Willow Creek. "Put some of that anti-itch cream on it," she said, kissing the top of his head before grabbing her keys. "And stay away from the creek today. Mrs. Hutchinson said she saw some nasty-looking bugs down there yesterday." Ethan nodded obediently, though she caught the disappointed look in his eyes. The creek was his sanctuary, his outdoor laboratory where he studied the natural world with the intensity of a future scientist. 3 days later, a package arrived with no return address, just their names written in careful block letters across brown paper. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a well-worn teddy bear with patches of faded brown fur and button eyes that had seen better days. A handwritten note was tucked underneath. "For Ethan, from your daddy's army buddy Jake. Michael talked about you every day. Thought you should have this." Jennifer stared at the note, searching her memory. Michael had mentioned fellow soldiers, but no one named Jake stood out in her recollections of his stories. Ethan, however, was instantly enchanted. He clutched the bear to his chest, inhaling deeply. "It smells like Daddy," he whispered, and Jennifer's heart clenched. Whether it actually carried Michael's scent or was simply the boy's desperate need for connection, she couldn't bring herself to question the comfort it provided. That night, for the first time since his father's death, Ethan slept through the night without nightmares. But Eleanor Hutchinson had survived 7.5 decades by paying attention to details others missed. When she saw the package being delivered, something nagged at her. "Honey," she said to Jennifer the next morning, "did Michael ever mention having Army friends who knew where you lived now? Because most folks from his unit would have sent condolences through official channels, not personal packages 2 years later." Jennifer shrugged, though Eleanor's words planted a seed of unease. "Maybe he got our address from someone else. Does it matter? Ethan loves that bear." Eleanor nodded, but her expression remained troubled. She'd noticed other things, too. Strange insects near the creek that didn't belong in Michigan, and the way several neighborhood children had been developing odd skin irritations that didn't respond to typical treatments. Meanwhile, Ethan's mosquito bite was changing. What had started as a small red bump was growing larger and darker in the center, developing an angry purple hue that made Jennifer frown every time she looked at it. When she applied antibiotic ointment, Ethan would wince and pull away, complaining that it felt weird inside, like something was moving beneath the skin. Jennifer attributed this to a child's imagination and the natural itching that came with healing. "Mom, it's getting bigger," Ethan said one evening, pointing to his neck in the bathroom mirror. Indeed, what had been the size of a pencil eraser was now closer to a marble, raised and warm to the touch. The center had developed a dark spot that looked almost like a tiny puncture wound. "It might be infected, sweetheart," Jennifer said, trying to keep concern out of her voice. "We'll keep an eye on it." But privately, she was calculating the cost of an urgent care visit against her dwindling bank account. $47 wouldn't cover much of anything in the American healthcare system, and her next paycheck wasn't due for 5 days. Eleanor knocked on their door that evening, carrying a plate of homemade cookies and wearing the expression Jennifer had learned meant serious conversation. "I've been doing some reading," the older woman said, settling into their kitchen chair with a grunt. "About those bugs I've been seeing, and about that bear." She paused, studying Ethan as he played on the floor with his new treasure. "Did you notice it has some loose stitching right along the seam there?" Jennifer looked more closely at the teddy bear and saw what Eleanor meant. Several stitches along the bear's side appeared to have been recently repaired, and the thread didn't quite match the original. "Maybe it's just old," she said, but Eleanor shook her head. In 42 years of teaching, I learned to trust my instincts about things that don't feel right, Eleanor said quietly. And honey, nothing about this feels right. That bite on Ethan's neck, the timing of this package, those strange insects by the creek. I think we need to start paying closer attention to what's happening in our neighborhood. That night, as if summoned by Eleanor's words, Ethan woke up screaming. The digital clock beside Jennifer's bed read 3:17 a.m. When Ethan's scream tore through the thin walls of their trailer, a sound so raw and terrified that it launched her from sleep into full alertness in seconds. She stumbled down the narrow hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs, and found her son sitting up in bed, his small body trembling as he clutched his neck with both hands. "Baby, what's wrong?" Jennifer dropped to her knees beside his bed, gently pulling his hands away from his throat. What she saw made her stomach lurch. The bump that had been the size of a marble yesterday was now swollen to nearly the size of a ping-pong ball, the skin stretched tight and shiny. The dark center had split slightly, revealing what looked like a tiny crater. And as she watched in horrified fascination, something thin and black emerged from the opening, no thicker than a thread, but unmistakably moving. "There's something in there, Mom," Ethan whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I can feel it moving around. It tickles and hurts at the same time." The black, thread-like appendage waved slightly in the air before disappearing back into the wound, and Jennifer had to grip the edge of the mattress to keep from fainting. "Oh God, she breathed, her nursing training warring with maternal panic. This wasn't any infection she'd ever encountered in her years at the hospital. This was something alive, something that had taken up residence in her son's body, and the realization made her feel sick and helpless in equal measure. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her gray hair in curlers and her robe hastily thrown over her nightgown. She took one look at Ethan's neck and her face went pale. "Child, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "How long has that thing been moving like that?" "It started tonight," Ethan sobbed. "I woke up because it felt like something was trying to crawl out of my skin." Eleanor moved closer, examining the wound with the clinical detachment of someone who had dealt with countless childhood injuries over 4 decades of teaching. But Jennifer could see her hands shaking slightly as she peered at the swollen flesh. "This isn't natural," Eleanor said quietly, straightening up and fixing Jennifer with a grave look. "I've seen every kind of bug bite and skin infection you can imagine, and this is something else entirely. We need to get him medical help immediately." She paused, glancing at the teddy bear that had fallen to the floor beside Ethan's bed. "And I think we need to examine that bear more closely." Jennifer's mind raced through their options, each one more impossible than the last. The emergency room would cost thousands they didn't have, and their insurance had lapsed 2 months ago when she'd been forced to choose between premiums and rent. The urgent care clinic wouldn't open for another 5 hours, and she doubted they'd be equipped to handle whatever this was anyway. "I can't afford the hospital," she whispered, hating herself for saying the words aloud in front of her terrified son. "I've got $47 in my account and rent's due tomorrow." The admission felt like admitting she was a failure as a mother, that her poverty was putting her child's life at risk. Eleanor's expression softened with understanding and determination. "Then we figure this out ourselves until we can get proper help," she said firmly. "I'm calling my neighbor Betty. Her grandson works at the county health department. Maybe he can tell us what we're dealing with, or at least point us in the right direction." While Eleanor made her phone calls, Jennifer sat beside Ethan, gently stroking his hair and trying to project calm she didn't feel. The wound continued to pulse slightly, and she could swear she saw movement just beneath the skin, as if something was writhing in the infected tissue. Her son's forehead felt warm, not quite feverish but warmer than normal, and she wondered if whatever was in there was making him sick in other ways. "Mom, the bear smells funny now," Ethan said suddenly, looking at where the teddy had fallen. "It didn't smell like that before." It smells like something rotten. Jennifer picked up the bear and immediately noticed what he meant. The musty, comfortable scent it had carried before was now overlaid with something organic and unpleasant, like meat left too long in summer heat. Eleanor returned from the kitchen, her face grim. Betty's grandson isn't answering his phone, but she gave me the number for the state health department's emergency line. They said if we suspect some kind of parasitic infection, we need to preserve any specimens and get to a hospital that deals with infectious diseases. She held up a small mason jar. Next time that thing comes out, we need to be ready. As if summoned by her words, the black appendage emerged again, this time accompanied by what looked like a tiny leg or antenna. Jennifer fought down her revulsion and grabbed the jar, but the creature retreated before she could capture it. "It's like it knows we're watching," she breathed. "Jennifer," Eleanor said slowly, turning the teddy bear over in her hands. "Look at this." She pointed to the loose stitching they'd noticed before, but now it was clear that the seam had been deliberately opened and re-sewn. Someone put something inside this bear. "And I don't think it was your husband's army buddy." The implications hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Someone had deliberately sent this infected toy to her son, had targeted him specifically. But who would do such a thing, and why? As she looked at Ethan's frightened face and the grotesque wound on his neck, she realized they weren't just dealing with a medical emergency. They were dealing with something much more sinister, and she had no idea who they could trust or where to turn for help. The thing in her son's neck pulsed again, and Jennifer made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out who had done this, and she was going to make them pay. By dawn, Jennifer had made a decision that went against every prideful bone in her body. Sitting at her kitchen table with her phone in trembling hands, she scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't called in 3 years. Dr. Rachel Thompson. Rachel had been Michael's girlfriend in college, before Jennifer had come along and changed everything. They'd maintained an awkward civility after the wedding, but Rachel had disappeared from their lives completely after Michael's death, leaving only a brief condolence card with her professional letterhead. "Please still have the same number," Jennifer whispered as she dialed. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Dr. Thompson?" The voice was professional even in sleep, and Jennifer felt a familiar pang of inadequacy. "Rachel, it's Jennifer Miller, Michael's wife." The words came out in a rush. "I know we haven't spoken since the funeral, and I know this is asking a lot, but I need help." "It's Ethan. Something's wrong with him, something the doctors here won't understand, and I don't have anywhere else to turn." There was a long pause, and Jennifer held her breath, waiting for the polite refusal that would confirm her worst fears about being truly alone in this crisis. Instead, Rachel's voice came back sharp with concern. "What kind of something? Medical emergency?" "There's a parasite," Jennifer said, the words feeling surreal even as she spoke them. "Living under his skin. It moves, Rachel. I can see it moving, and I don't know what to do." She found herself crying, all the fear and exhaustion of the past few hours finally breaking through her careful composure. "I'm 3 hours away in Detroit," Rachel said immediately, and Jennifer could hear her moving around, already preparing. "Keep the area clean, don't let him scratch it, and document everything. Take pictures if you can." "I'm leaving now." Eleanor knocked softly and entered the trailer carrying a plate of scrambled eggs and toast that smelled like hope. "How's our patient this morning?" she asked, though her eyes immediately went to Ethan's neck where the swelling seemed even more pronounced in the morning light. "It hurts worse today," Ethan said quietly, picking at the eggs Eleanor had prepared. "And I keep having weird dreams like I'm underwater and can't breathe, but I'm not drowning, just stuck." His description sent chills down Jennifer's spine, and she caught Eleanor's meaningful look across the table. "Honey, I've been thinking about what you said last night," Eleanor said carefully. "About that bear and someone putting something inside it. I think we need to consider that this might not be an accident." She pulled out a notebook filled with her careful teacher's handwriting. "I spent the night making some calls to old friends, people who've been in this community longer than I have." Jennifer leaned forward, desperate for any information that might make sense of their nightmare. Eleanor flipped through several pages before finding what she was looking for. "Mrs. Rodriguez down the street says her grandson had similar symptoms 6 months ago. Started with a bite near his ear, swelling that wouldn't go down, complaints about something moving under his skin. The clinic gave him antibiotics and told her it was a severe reaction to a spider bite." Eleanor's voice grew grimmer. "The boy ended up in the emergency room with a fever of 104 and had to have emergency surgery. They removed what the doctor called unidentifiable foreign material from the wound." "What happened to the material they removed?" Jennifer asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Disappeared from the lab before it could be tested. Hospital said it was a clerical error, but Mrs. Rodriguez never believed that explanation." Eleanor flipped another page. "Then there's the Patterson boy and the Williams girl, and at least 3 others. All the same pattern. Mysterious bites, rapid swelling, something moving under the skin. All from families who couldn't afford to push for answers when the official diagnosis didn't make sense." The implications were staggering. Jennifer felt sick, thinking about other parents who had gone through what she was experiencing now, other children who had suffered while adults dismissed their symptoms as hysteria or infection. "Someone's targeting poor kids," she said slowly. "Kids whose parents can't fight back when they get brushed off by doctors." "That's exactly what I think," Eleanor said. "And I think whoever sent that bear knows exactly what they're doing." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small pair of sewing scissors. "I took the liberty of examining that teddy bear more closely while you were on the phone. Look at this." Eleanor carefully cut along the loosely stitched seam they'd noticed before, and the stuffing inside the bear shifted unnaturally. Instead of the uniform cotton batting Jennifer expected, there were small pockets sewn into the interior, and within those pockets were what looked like cocoons or egg sacs, each about the size of a lima bean and slightly damp to the touch. "Oh, God," Jennifer breathed, backing away from the table. "Those things were inside the bear the whole time. Ethan's been sleeping with them for over a week." The full horror of the situation hit her. Someone had deliberately crafted a biological weapon disguised as a child's comfort object, and they'd targeted her son specifically. Ethan looked between the adults with growing alarm. "What does that mean? Are there more things that might get in me?" His voice was small and scared, and Jennifer had to fight the urge to grab him and run as far from this place as possible. "No, baby," she said firmly, though she had no idea if that was true. "We're going to figure this out and make sure you're safe. Dr. Thompson is coming to help us, and she's one of the smartest people I know." It hurt to admit Rachel's competence, but her son's life mattered more than old jealousies. Eleanor was examining the egg sacs with a magnifying glass she'd retrieved from her purse. "These are definitely organic, and they look like they were designed to activate slowly, probably from body heat or moisture. Whoever made this knows about insect biology and reproduction cycles." She looked up at Jennifer with steely determination. "This isn't some random prank or accident. This is deliberate, calculated, and scientific." "But who would do this?" Jennifer asked, though even as she spoke, her mind was already turning toward the most obvious suspect in their community. Whitmore Chemical had been the source of complaints and mysterious illnesses for years, but they had enough money and political connections to make problems disappear. And why Ethan specifically? "I think," Eleanor said slowly, "we need to consider the possibility that this has something to do with Michael. You said the note mentioned your husband specifically, claimed to be from one of his army buddies. What if Michael discovered something before he died? Something that made him a target? Jennifer's blood ran cold. Michael had been paranoid during his last leave, constantly checking locks and looking over his shoulder. He'd mentioned concerns about some of the contractors working alongside the military, companies that were more interested in profits than soldiers' safety. She'd attributed his worry to combat stress, but what if he'd been right to be afraid? "He tried to tell me something during our last phone call," she whispered, the memory flooding back with painful clarity. "He said there were people back home I couldn't trust, companies that were experimenting on soldiers without their knowledge. I thought he was just tired and stressed, but what if he was trying to warn me?" Before Eleanor could respond, a car door slammed outside, and Jennifer looked through the window to see a tall woman with auburn hair walking quickly toward their trailer. Dr. Rachel Thompson had arrived, carrying a medical bag and wearing the kind of focused expression that meant she was ready for battle. "She's here," Jennifer said, and felt a mix of relief and old insecurity wash over her. Rachel represented everything Jennifer had never been: educated, successful, confident in ways that came from privilege and opportunity rather than survival. But right now, those were exactly the qualities her son needed. Rachel knocked briskly and entered without waiting for an invitation, her professional demeanor immediately taking command of the situation. She was older than Jennifer remembered, with lines around her eyes that spoke of long hours and difficult decisions, but her hands were steady as she set down her bag and turned to examine Ethan. "Let me see what we're dealing with," Rachel said gently to the boy, her voice transforming from clinical to compassionate as she approached her patient. Ethan looked to his mother for permission, then tilted his head to show the grotesque swelling that had consumed the left side of his neck. Rachel's expression didn't change as she examined the wound, but Jennifer caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was seeing something worse than expected. "Ethan, can you tell me exactly how this feels?" "Does it hurt or itch or feel like pressure?" "It feels like something's swimming around in there," Ethan said seriously. "And sometimes it tries to come out, but then it goes back in like it's scared of the light." Rachel nodded thoughtfully, then looked at the dismantled teddy bear and the egg sacs Eleanor had discovered. "This is definitely parasitic," she said quietly to the adults, "but it's not any natural parasite I've encountered. The behavior patterns, the controlled reproduction cycle, the targeted delivery system, this is sophisticated bioengineering." She turned back to Jennifer with an expression that was part determination and part old sadness. Michael was right to be worried. Someone's been conducting illegal experiments, and they're using children as test subjects. The room fell silent as the full implications of Rachel's words sank in. They weren't just dealing with a medical emergency anymore. They were dealing with a conspiracy that had cost Michael his life and was now threatening his son. Rachel's hands moved with surgical precision as she prepared a makeshift sterile field on Jennifer's kitchen table, transforming the humble trailer into an emergency operating theater. "We can't wait for a hospital," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life or death decisions. "Whatever's in there is growing rapidly, and if it reaches his lymph nodes or bloodstream, we'll lose any chance of containing it." Eleanor had sent word through the trailer park's informal communication network, and within minutes, their small home was surrounded by neighbors who understood that when one family faced a crisis, the entire community rallied. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with clean towels and boiled water. Mr. Patterson, the Vietnam veteran from 3 trailers down, stationed himself at the front door with a stern expression that made it clear no unwelcome visitors would be disturbing the proceedings. Betty Chen brought her first aid supplies and took charge of keeping curious children at a safe distance. "I need you to understand," Rachel said quietly to Jennifer. "This is going to be traumatic for all of us. I'm going to have to make an incision and remove whatever's living in there, and Ethan will be conscious for most of it. Local anesthetic is all I can safely administer outside a hospital setting." Jennifer nodded, fighting back tears as she looked at her son's pale face. Ethan had been unusually quiet since Rachel's arrival, as if he understood the gravity of the situation even at 10 years old. "Will it hurt?" he asked directly. And Jennifer loved him fiercely for his bravery in asking the question she was too afraid to voice. "It will hurt some," Rachel admitted honestly. "But I'm going to do everything I can to minimize that. And your mom and Mrs. Hutchinson will be right here with you the whole time." She knelt down to Ethan's eye level. "You're going to need to be very brave, like your daddy was. Can you do that for me?" The procedure began with Rachel carefully cleaning the swollen area while Eleanor held Ethan's hand and whispered stories about his father's childhood adventures. Jennifer stood ready with gauze and instruments, her nursing training allowing her to assist despite her emotional turmoil. As the local anesthetic took effect, Rachel made a precise incision along the length of the swelling. What emerged defied every expectation. The parasite was nearly 3 inches long, segmented like a worm but with tiny appendages along its sides and a distinct head that moved independently from its body. It was unlike anything in medical textbooks, clearly the result of genetic manipulation that combined characteristics from multiple species. Most disturbing was its apparent intelligence. It writhed and twisted as if actively trying to escape capture. And when Rachel finally extracted it with forceps, it seemed to look directly at them with primitive but unmistakable awareness. "There's more," Rachel announced grimly, peering into the wound. Over the next 20 minutes, she removed 2 additional parasites, each slightly smaller than the first but equally active and aggressive. The creatures were placed in separate specimen containers, where they continued to move and probe against the glass barriers. Ethan bore the procedure with remarkable stoicism, though tears streamed down his cheeks, and his small hand gripped Eleanor's fingers with desperate intensity. When it was finally over, Rachel carefully sutured the wound and applied sterile dressings, her movements economical and precise, despite the emotional weight of the situation. "Is that all of them?" Jennifer asked, though she dreaded the answer. Rachel examined the wound cavity thoroughly before responding. "I believe so, but we'll need to monitor him closely. These things were designed to be removed intact. Notice how they didn't fragment or release toxins when extracted. Someone wanted them to be recoverable." Her expression darkened. This was never meant to be permanent. It was a field test. As Rachel cleaned up her instruments, Eleanor was already formulating their next steps. "We need to document everything and get these specimens to someone who can analyze them properly," she said. "But first, we need to figure out who's responsible and why they targeted Ethan specifically." The answer came sooner than expected. As Jennifer was helping Rachel pack her medical supplies, a black sedan pulled up outside their trailer, its tinted windows and government license plates immediately recognizable to anyone who had dealt with military bureaucracy. 2 men in expensive suits emerged, walking with the measured confidence of federal agents. "Dr. Thompson?" The older agent flashed credentials as he approached their door. "Agent Morrison, CDC. We understand you've been treating a case involving unidentified parasitic organisms. We're here to collect any specimens and conduct a health assessment of the affected individual." Rachel's expression hardened instantly. "How did you know we were here? We haven't reported this to any government agencies yet." Her question hung in the air like an accusation, and Jennifer felt a chill of recognition. These men had been watching them, had known about the parasites before the extraction had even taken place. "Ma'am, we monitor unusual biological incidents as part of our national security protocols," the younger agent replied smoothly. "We're here to help ensure this situation doesn't pose a broader public health risk." Eleanor stepped forward, her 75 years of experience with bureaucratic nonsense evident in her steely demeanor. "Gentlemen, in 42 years of teaching, I learned to recognize when someone's trying to sell me a story that doesn't add up. If you're really from the CDC, you'll have proper documentation, you'll follow established protocols for biological containment, and you'll explain how you knew to come here before any official reports were filed. The agents exchanged glances, and Jennifer caught something in their expressions that confirmed her worst fears. These weren't government health officials. They were cleanup crew sent to make sure the evidence of illegal human experimentation disappeared along with any witnesses who might ask inconvenient questions. Dr. Thompson, Agent Morrison said, his tone becoming less friendly. We're going to need you to turn over any biological specimens you've collected. Along with any photographs or documentation of the procedure, this matter falls under federal jurisdiction now. Like hell it does, Rachel replied sharply. Those specimens are medical evidence of a crime against a child, and they're going to a legitimate laboratory for proper analysis. If you want them, you can get a court order. She moved protectively closer to Ethan, who was still groggy from the local anesthetic, but alert enough to sense the tension in the room. The standoff might have escalated if not for the arrival of an unexpected ally. A battered pickup truck pulled up behind the government sedan, and a teenage girl with long blonde hair climbed out, walking toward their trailer with determined steps. Jennifer recognized her immediately as Ashley Whitmore, daughter of the chemical plant owner, though she'd never spoken to the girl directly. "Excuse me," Ashley called out, addressing the agents with surprising confidence for someone her age. "Are you here about the biological testing my father's company has been conducting on local residents?" Her question caused both agents to freeze, and Jennifer realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a whistleblower with inside knowledge. Ashley walked directly to Rachel and handed her a thick manila envelope. "Dr. Thompson, my name is Ashley Whitmore. My father owns the chemical plant upstream from this community, and I have documentation proving that your patient and several other children have been subjects in unauthorized medical experiments." She looked directly at the agents, her young face set with determination that reminded Jennifer of Eleanor's stubborn courage. "Gentlemen, I believe you'll find that your jurisdiction doesn't extend to covering up crimes against American children." Agent Morrison's composure finally cracked. "Miss Whitmore, you're interfering with a federal investigation. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside and allow us to complete our work here." "What federal investigation?" Ashley shot back. "Because according to the documents I've copied from my father's files, this whole operation has been conducted without any government oversight whatsoever. In fact, the only federal involvement has been a systematic cover-up designed to protect corporate interests." She gestured toward the trailer park around them. "These families deserve to know what was done to their children, and they deserve justice." The confrontation was interrupted by the sound of multiple car doors slamming as more neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion and the presence of government vehicles in their usually quiet community. Jennifer watched as a crowd began to gather, residents who had lived with mysterious illnesses and dismissed symptoms for months, finally seeing a chance for answers. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice carrying across the growing crowd. "My grandson had surgery 6 months ago for the same kind of infection. Are you telling me someone did this to him on purpose?" Her question was taken up by other voices, other parents who had been told their children's symptoms were psychosomatic or the result of poor hygiene. As the crowd grew larger and more vocal, the two agents realized their position had become untenable. They couldn't arrest an entire neighborhood, and the presence of a corporate whistleblower with documented evidence had transformed a simple cleanup operation into a potential public relations disaster. "This isn't over," Agent Morrison said quietly to Rachel as he and his partner retreated toward their sedan. "These specimens represent a potential bioterror threat, and we will recover them through proper channels." But as their car disappeared down the trailer park's main road, Jennifer felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the power of a community united in pursuit of truth and justice. They had evidence, they had witnesses, and most importantly, they had each other. The elation of standing up to the government agents was short-lived. 3 days after the confrontation, Ethan's condition took a devastating turn that shattered every hope Jennifer had dared to nurture. She woke to find him burning with fever, his small body racked with chills so violent that his teeth chattered uncontrollably. The surgical site on his neck, which had been healing cleanly under Rachel's careful attention, was now angry and inflamed, with red streaks spreading toward his lymph nodes like poison seeping through his system. "His temperature is 104.2, Rachel announced grimly, removing the thermometer from Ethan's ear with hands that trembled slightly despite her professional composure. "The parasites released toxins when they were removed. His body is going into septic shock." She looked up at Jennifer with an expression that conveyed everything words couldn't. They were losing him. Jennifer collapsed into the chair beside Ethan's bed, watching her son's chest rise and fall in rapid, shallow breaths that reminded her horribly of Michael's final moments in the hospital after the roadside bomb. Ethan's eyes were glassy and unfocused, and when she took his hand, his skin felt like paper, dry and fragile and burning with unnatural heat. "What do we do?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer would break what remained of her heart. "He needs immediate hospitalization," Rachel said quietly. "Intensive care, IV antibiotics, possibly dialysis if his kidneys start shutting down. Without professional medical intervention, he won't survive another 24 hours. The clinical precision of her words couldn't mask the devastation in her voice, and Jennifer realized that Rachel was grieving too, not just as a doctor watching a patient decline, but as someone who had loved Michael and now saw his son slipping away. Eleanor, who had maintained a steady presence throughout their ordeal, finally spoke the words that hung unspoken between them all. "Jennifer, honey, you know what hospitalization means. The bills alone will destroy any chance you have of keeping your home, and that's assuming the insurance company doesn't find reasons to deny coverage for experimental parasite treatment." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had watched too many families choose between medical bankruptcy and losing their loved ones. The financial reality was as brutal as Ethan's medical condition. Jennifer had researched pediatric intensive care costs during sleepless hours over the past few days, and the numbers were staggering. $3,000 to $5,000 per day, plus specialist consultations, laboratory work, and medications that could easily push the total into 6 figures. Even if Ethan recovered completely, the debt would follow them for decades, making it impossible to rebuild the stable life he deserved. "I don't care about the money," Jennifer said fiercely, though her voice cracked with the lie. "I'll sell everything, work 3 jobs for the rest of my life if that's what it takes. He's not dying because his mother couldn't afford to save him." But even as she spoke the words, she knew the arithmetic of poverty made her promises meaningless. The hospital would require payment guarantees before admitting Ethan to intensive care, and her credit was already destroyed from trying to keep up with basic living expenses after Michael's death. Ashley Whitmore had remained in the community since her dramatic confrontation with the government agents, staying in Eleanor's spare bedroom and working tirelessly to document the extent of her father's illegal experiments. Now she stepped forward with an offer that felt like salvation wrapped in moral complexity. "I have access to my trust fund," she said quietly, her 17-year-old voice carrying an adult's understanding of consequences. "It's worth nearly $200,000, money my grandfather left for my college education. I can pay for Ethan's treatment, all of it, whatever it costs." She looked directly at Jennifer with eyes that held too much pain for someone her age. "My family caused this. It's my responsibility to fix it." The offer should have felt like a miracle, but Jennifer found herself torn between gratitude and a crushing sense of defeat. Accepting Ashley's money would save her son's life, But it would also mean admitting that justice in America was still determined by wealth, that her child's survival depended on the charity of the same family that had deliberately poisoned him. The irony was almost unbearable. The Whitmore fortune, built on exploiting poor communities like Pinewood, would now be used to repair the damage that exploitation had caused. "I can't ask you to sacrifice your future for my son," Jennifer said, though every maternal instinct screamed at her to accept the lifeline being offered. "You're not asking," Ashley replied firmly. "I'm offering. And honestly, using that blood money to save lives instead of funding more of my father's experiments feels like the first worthwhile thing I've ever done with the Whitmore name." Her words carried a bitter wisdom that spoke to the complexity of inherited guilt and the price of family loyalty. Eleanor placed a weathered hand on Jennifer's shoulder, her touch conveying 40 years of experience with impossible choices. "Honey, pride is a luxury you can't afford right now. That boy needs medical care, and if this young woman is offering help, you take it and worry about the rest later." Her voice carried the authority of someone who had watched too many children suffer because adults let principles interfere with practical solutions. Rachel was already on her phone, arranging Ethan's transfer to Children's Hospital in Detroit, where she had connections and could ensure he received the specialized care his condition required. "The ambulance will be here in 20 minutes, she announced. "Ashley, I'll need you to contact the hospital's financial department directly and arrange payment guarantees. Jennifer, pack a bag for yourself and Ethan. You'll probably be there for at least a week." As Jennifer threw clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands, she felt the full weight of their situation settling on her shoulders. Her son was dying from parasites deliberately placed in his body by people who saw him as nothing more than a test subject. She was about to become financially dependent on the daughter of the man who had orchestrated that attack. And somewhere in the background, government agents were working to cover up evidence of crimes against American children. The ambulance arrived as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the trailer park that had become both their sanctuary and their battlefield. Ethan was loaded onto a stretcher, his small form dwarfed by medical equipment and the efficiency of professional emergency responders. As the vehicle pulled away with lights flashing, Jennifer pressed her face against the rear window, watching Eleanor and Ashley grow smaller in the distance. "Mrs. Miller," one of the paramedics said gently, "your son's vital signs are stable for transport, but I need you to understand that the next few hours are going to be critical. The doctors at Children's Hospital are excellent, and they're expecting us. Try to stay strong for him." Jennifer nodded, gripping Ethan's limp hand as the ambulance raced through the darkening Michigan countryside. Her son's breathing was labored, and his skin had taken on a grayish pallor that reminded her of old photographs, as if life was already beginning to fade from his small body. She found herself praying to a God she'd stopped believing in after Michael's death, bargaining with whatever cosmic forces might be listening. "Please," she whispered, her words lost in the ambulance's mechanical sounds, "don't take him too. I can't lose them both. I'll do anything, sacrifice anything, but please don't make me bury my child." The prayer felt desperate and pathetic, but it was all she had left to offer in exchange for her son's life. As the city lights of Detroit appeared on the horizon, Jennifer realized that regardless of the outcome, nothing would ever be the same. The conspiracy that had targeted her family had already cost them their innocence, their financial security, and their faith in the institutions that were supposed to protect them. Now it threatened to take the only thing that truly mattered, the bright, curious boy who carried his father's legacy and his mother's hope for the future. The ambulance pulled into the hospital's emergency bay, and Jennifer steeled herself for the battle ahead, knowing that saving Ethan's life was only the beginning of a much larger fight for justice and accountability. The revelation came at 2:30 a.m. on Ethan's fourth day in intensive care. delivered by a woman Jennifer had never expected to see again. She was dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside her son's bed when a soft knock interrupted her restless sleep. Through the glass door she could see a figure in scrubs, but as the person entered, Jennifer realized it wasn't one of Ethan's regular nurses. Dr. Sarah Chen was older than Jennifer remembered from Michael's funeral, her black hair now streaked with silver and her face marked by lines that spoke of too many difficult nights. She had been Michael's primary physician during his final deployment, the Army doctor who had tried desperately to save him after the roadside bomb. Now she stood in the doorway of her son's hospital room, her expression carrying the weight of secrets that had festered for 2 years. "Jennifer, I know you have no reason to trust me, Doctor," Chen said quietly, glancing at Ethan's sleeping form connected to monitors and IV lines. "But I have information about what really happened to Michael and why your son was targeted." She pulled a chair closer to Jennifer's side, her movements careful and deliberate. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about your husband's death." Jennifer's heart began racing as she studied the woman's face, searching for signs of deception or manipulation. Dr. Chen had been present during Michael's final hours, had been the one to call with the news that destroyed Jennifer's world, and now she was appearing like a ghost with promises of truth. "Michael wasn't killed by a roadside bomb," Dr. Chen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was poisoned, deliberately, by people who wanted to silence him before he could expose what he'd discovered about illegal human experimentation being conducted on American soil." She reached into her pocket and withdrew a thick envelope sealed with medical tape. "He gave me this the day before he died, made me promise to deliver it to you if anything happened to him. I was a coward, Jennifer. I was afraid of what would happen to my own family if I kept that promise." The envelope felt heavy in Jennifer's hands, as if it contained not just papers but the weight of 2 years of lies and misdirection. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal and found Michael's familiar handwriting covering dozens of pages, along with photographs, chemical analysis reports, and what appeared to be internal corporate communications. "Jen," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means they got to me before I could get home to protect you and Ethan. I've discovered something that connects Whitmore Chemical to a network of defense contractors who have been using American civilians as test subjects for biological weapons research. The poor communities are perfect targets because when people get sick, everyone assumes it's their own fault for living in polluted areas." Jennifer's hands shook as she continued reading, each page revealing a conspiracy more horrifying than she could have imagined. Michael had documented systematic human experimentation conducted in trailer parks, housing projects, and rural communities across multiple states. Children had been infected with engineered parasites, elderly residents exposed to neurological toxins, and entire families used as control groups in studies that violated every principle of medical ethics. "The most damning evidence," Michael's letter continued, "involves a project called Vector Assessment, where they're testing delivery systems for biological agents. They've developed ways to embed parasites in common household items, toys, clothing, food packaging, and they're field testing these methods on families they consider expendable. Whitmore Chemical is just one piece of a much larger operation funded by black-budget military contracts." Dr. Chen watched Jennifer's face as she absorbed the devastating information. Michael tried to report this through official channels, but everyone he contacted either ignored him or actively worked to suppress his findings. The night before he died, he called me in a panic, said he'd been followed and his communications were being monitored. He was terrified they would come after you and Ethan next. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Jennifer demanded, her voice rising despite Ethan's sleeping presence. "I spent 2 years thinking my husband died in a random attack, mourning him while raising our son in poverty. never knowing we were being hunted by the same people who killed him. Because I was afraid, Dr. Chen admitted, her professional composure cracking to reveal genuine anguish. I have 2 daughters, Jennifer. When Michael died, I received a visit from men who made it very clear that my family's safety depended on my continued silence. I convinced myself that keeping quiet was protecting everyone, but watching your son fight for his life because of my cowardice. She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Jennifer continued reading through Michael's documentation, each page adding another layer to the conspiracy. The teddy bear that had infected Ethan was part of a systematic program to test biological weapons delivery on military families, revenge against soldiers who had tried to expose the illegal experiments. Michael's name appeared on a target list, along with other whistleblowers who had been eliminated through methods designed to look like accidents or combat casualties. "There's more," Dr. Chen said, pulling out a second envelope. "I've been quietly investigating since Michael's death, documenting similar cases across the country. The pattern is always the same: poor communities, suspicious illnesses, medical cover-ups, and threats against anyone who asks too many questions. Your case in Pinewood is just one of dozens currently active." The second envelope contained evidence that made Jennifer's blood run cold. Photographs of other children with symptoms identical to Ethan's, medical records that had been altered or destroyed, and correspondence between government officials and corporate executives discussing acceptable casualty rates for human testing programs. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, involving multiple federal agencies and defense contractors working together to use American citizens as laboratory animals. "Rachel Thompson has been part of this investigation," Dr. Chen revealed, causing Jennifer to gasp in shock. "She's been working with me for over a year, trying to gather enough evidence to expose the entire network. Her decision to help your son wasn't motivated by guilt over Michael. She's been hunting the people who killed him." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Rachel appeared in the doorway, her expression grim but determined. "Jennifer, I'm sorry we had to deceive you, but we needed to be certain about your safety before revealing the full scope of what we're dealing with." She moved to check Ethan's monitors, her professional routine continuing even as she delivered world-shattering revelations. "The good news," Rachel continued, "is that Ethan is responding well to the specialized treatment we've developed based on Michael's research. The parasites he was infected with are part of a specific bioweapons program, and we've created targeted antibodies that are neutralizing the toxins in his system. He's going to survive." Jennifer felt tears of relief streaming down her face as she looked at her son's peaceful expression, no longer gray with fever but showing healthy color for the first time in days. "But what about the people responsible? What about justice for Michael and all the other victims?" Dr. Chen exchanged glances with Rachel before responding. "That's where Ashley Whitmore becomes crucial to our plans. She's been wearing a wire during conversations with her father, and we now have recorded confessions that implicate the highest levels of the conspiracy. Combined with Michael's documentation and our medical evidence, we have enough to bring down the entire network. The FBI raid is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Rachel added. "Not the corrupt agents who tried to cover this up, but a special task force that's been investigating defense contractor fraud. Ashley's trust fund payment for Ethan's treatment has been traced through multiple bank accounts, revealing the financial structure they've used to fund these illegal programs." Jennifer looked down at her sleeping son, then at the evidence scattered across the hospital table, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were confronting. "Michael died trying to expose this," she said quietly, "and now his son nearly died because of it. How do we make sure this never happens to another family?" "We tell the truth," Dr. Chen replied simply. "All of it, loudly and publicly, until no one can ignore what's been done in their name. Michael's sacrifice wasn't in vain if it leads to justice for all the victims." As dawn broke over Detroit, Jennifer realized that their nightmare was finally transforming into something else, a fight for accountability that would honor Michael's memory and protect other innocent families from the same fate. 6 months later, Jennifer Miller stood in the community center that had been built where the old Whitmore chemical plant once operated, watching her son Ethan help Eleanor Hutchinson arrange folding chairs for their weekly support group meeting. The transformation seemed almost miraculous to her sometimes, not just the physical changes to their neighborhood, but the deeper healing that had taken place in their hearts and community. Ethan's recovery had been complete and remarkable. The specialized treatment developed from Michael's research notes had not only neutralized the parasite toxins, but had also strengthened his immune system in unexpected ways. At 11 years old, he was healthier and more vibrant than ever, his natural curiosity now channeled into legitimate scientific research under Rachel's mentorship. He had testified via video conference during the federal trials, his clear, brave testimony helping to convict 17 people involved in the biological weapons conspiracy. "Mom, Doctor, Rachel says the new medical clinic should be ready to open next week," Ethan called out, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who had learned that even the darkest situations could transform into hope. The free clinic, funded by the settlement money from Whitmore Chemical's bankruptcy and federal penalties, would serve 3 counties and specialize in environmental health issues. Rachel had left her position in Detroit to run it, finally finding a way to channel her grief over her own daughter's death into preventing similar tragedies. Eleanor, now 76 and officially recognized as the community's elder stateswoman, moved with the careful dignity of someone who had lived to see justice triumph over corporate greed. The state of Michigan had awarded her the Governor's Medal for Civic Courage, and the University of Michigan had established the Eleanor Hutchinson Scholarship for students from economically disadvantaged communities pursuing careers in environmental advocacy. "You know, Jennifer," Eleanor said, settling into one of the chairs with a contented sigh, "when I was teaching school all those years, I used to tell my students that America's greatest strength wasn't our military or our economy, but our ability to come together when good people decided to fight for what's right. I never imagined I'd get to see that lesson played out so dramatically in my own backyard." The support group they facilitated now included families from across the Midwest who had been affected by the biological weapons testing program. What had started as a small gathering in Eleanor's trailer had grown into a national network of survivors advocating for stronger protections against human experimentation and corporate environmental crimes. Jennifer had discovered she had a gift for helping other parents navigate the complex legal and medical challenges that came with seeking justice against powerful institutions. Ashley Whitmore entered the community center carrying a box of homemade cookies, her presence no longer causing the awkward silence it had in the early days after her father's arrest. At 18, she had used her inheritance not just to pay for Ethan's medical care, but to establish a foundation that provided legal support for families fighting environmental crimes. She had legally changed her name to Ashley Miller Chen, honoring both Jennifer's family and Dr. Chen, who had become her unofficial guardian after she severed all ties with the Whitmore legacy. "The Hendersons from Ohio just arrived," Ashley announced, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had found her purpose in repairing the damage her family had caused. "Their daughter's symptoms are almost identical to what Ethan experienced. But the good news is, we caught it much earlier this time." The early detection protocols they had developed had already saved dozens of children from the prolonged suffering Ethan had endured. Dr. Sarah Chen, who had taken early retirement from the Army to work full-time on environmental health advocacy, was setting up her laptop to share the latest updates on the ongoing federal investigations. The prosecutions had expanded far beyond the original Whitmore case, uncovering a network of defense contractors and government officials who had been conducting illegal human experiments for over 2 decades. The final sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month, Dr. Chen reported to the assembled group. Marcus Whitmore received 25 years without the possibility of parole, and the lead federal prosecutor says our case has become the template for similar investigations nationwide. She looked directly at Jennifer with an expression of profound respect. Michael would be so proud of what you've accomplished. His research notes didn't just expose one conspiracy, they've led to systemic reforms that will protect families for generations. Jennifer felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with mentions of her late husband, but it no longer carried the sharp edge of unresolved grief. She had learned to live with missing him while celebrating the continuing impact of his courage. "I think about him every day," she said quietly. "But now, when I remember him, I see all of this too. The lives that were saved, the families that got justice, the community that came together. His death wasn't meaningless if it led to all of this." Rachel Thompson, who had arrived directly from the construction site of the new medical clinic, still carried traces of sawdust on her scrubs from inspecting the final preparations. Her relationship with Jennifer had evolved from complicated history to genuine friendship, forged through shared purpose. "I have news that I think you'll all appreciate," she announced. "The Environmental Protection Agency has designated our community as a Superfund success story. The creek is now cleaner than it was before Whitmore Chemical was ever built, and we've created a model for environmental restoration that's being replicated across the country." The meeting proceeded with its usual combination of practical updates and emotional support, but Jennifer found her attention drifting to the large photograph hanging on the community center wall. It showed the entire neighborhood on the day the chemical plant was demolished, residents of all ages holding hands as they watched the controlled explosion that symbolized the end of decades of corporate environmental terrorism. Ethan stood in the front row, his small hand linked with Eleanor's weathered one, both of them smiling with the satisfaction of having fought impossible odds and won. After the meeting ended and the last families had departed with resource packets and contact information for legal assistance, Jennifer found herself alone in the center with Ethan, who was methodically stacking chairs with the thoroughness he had inherited from his father. The quiet moments like these had become precious to her, opportunities to simply appreciate how far they had traveled from that terrifying night when something had been writhing under her son's skin. "Mom," Ethan said, pausing in his chair-stacking duties, "do you think Dad would be happy with how everything turned out?" The question was asked with the seriousness that characterized all of his inquiries about his father, and Jennifer knew he deserved an answer that honored both his intelligence and his need for reassurance. "I think your father would be amazed," she replied honestly. When he was trying to expose what Whitmore Chemical was doing, he was just one person fighting against impossible odds. He couldn't have imagined that his research would eventually bring down an entire network of people who were hurting innocent families. She moved to help him with the remaining chairs, working alongside her son in comfortable silence. "And I think he'd be incredibly proud of the man you're becoming. Not just because you survived what they did to you, but because of how you've chosen to use that experience to help other kids who are going through similar situations." Ethan had become something of a celebrity among the support group families, the boy who had beaten the bioweapons program and now served as living proof that recovery and justice were possible. As they turned off the lights and locked up the community center, Jennifer took one last look at the thriving neighborhood that had grown from the ashes of corporate exploitation. Children were playing safely in the park built over the former chemical waste site, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Families were gathering for dinner in homes that were finally free from environmental contamination. And somewhere in Detroit, Rachel was reviewing plans for medical facilities that would ensure no community would ever again suffer in silence from preventable diseases. The American dream, Jennifer realized, wasn't about individual wealth or success. It was about this: neighbors protecting each other truth prevailing over power, and love proving stronger than greed. They had not just survived their nightmare, they had transformed it into hope for countless other families who deserved the same chance at justice and healing. Sometimes the most profound victories aren't measured in dollars or accolades, but in the quiet moments when a community discovers its own strength. Jennifer Miller's journey from desperate single mother to community advocate reminds us that ordinary Americans can still fight impossible odds and win. At 38, facing corporate giants who saw her son as expendable, she could have surrendered to despair. Instead, she found what many of us remember from America's greatest generations: neighbors who show up when it matters, elders like 75-year-old Eleanor who refuse to let bullies win, and the unshakable belief that truth will eventually triumph over power. This story isn't just about biological weapons or corporate corruption. It's about rediscovering the values that built this country. It's about communities where people still know their neighbors' names, where a retired teacher's wisdom carries weight, and where love for our children transcends every barrier society tries to build between us. In a world that often feels divided and cynical, Jennifer's story proves that the American spirit of standing up for what's right isn't just alive. It's thriving in small communities where ordinary people do extraordinary things when their families are threatened. Share your thoughts. What moments in your own community have restored your faith in the power of neighbors helping neighbors? Have you ever had to stand up against seemingly impossible odds to protect someone you love?